Maybe I'll cultivate a relationship with early birds. I'm 30 seconds early. Hey everybody, my name's Margaret Pinard. I'm a historical fiction and fantasy author, and today we've got a wrap up. So we're doing the Booktube side of things. I've got 5 books and a couple of announcements, and they're all good. So very happy. We're talking about some historical mysteries, some straight history, some cookbook goodness for the summer, nonfiction about sociology stuff, and historical fantasy. So I think the people in the chat might like that. We've got links and recommendations and all sorts of fun stuff. So hopefully I'll give you an idea of what those books are like, and you could tell if you think you would like to read them yourself. I went into a special detail for 2 of the books on this list. So we're going to start with 3 that I didn't go into great detail, your regular wrap up. And then for the second half, we'll do the 2 that have more detail. So we've got Shannon, hello, hello. Made friends with the like button. Anita, hello. And Leo, hey, how you doing? I didn't respond to your text. I saw it and I biffed it. So nice to see you in the middle of the day, in the middle of the week. Ooh, who's not working? Okay, so we're gonna dive into the first one. Historical mystery. I got this from Backstory Used. It's called Anthem for Doomed Youth by Carol LaDunn. Carol LaDunn is an author who grew up in Britain but has lived in the US for 50 years. And not only the US, but in my backyard of Eugene, Oregon. I think I've read 2 or 3 of hers, and every time I come to the end and I see that, I go, Eugene, Oregon. That's like 2 hours away. But it's this cute series. It's called the Daisy Dalrymple Mysteries. It's this lady in the 1920s who is the daughter of a viscount, and she's married a police inspector. So it's an interesting partnership of across class lines, and she helps him investigate crimes. She constantly gets in the way because that's what women do in the 1920s, apparently. I wasn't a huge fan of the title being the Wilfred Owen poem. So if you are a World War I connoisseur, you know that Wilfred Owen is a war poet from the Great War, and his poem is, given at the beginning to introduce the book, but it seems like much heavier material. But that could also be because I've visited this topic before, and I liked other ways of portraying it better. So let's see, what can I not give away? So there's bodies in a forest, and there's some sort of, they don't know where to start really. There's bodies at vastly different dates, but at the exact same place in the forest. And so they think they have a serial killer. And Daisy steps in to connect them via World War I, which is like a few years before the story. And if you don't know, the main themes that I think historical mystery writers write about, or mine for good topics, are conscientious objectors and pacifism, and the way that troops were disciplined, and some of the horrors of war in those areas. So I've seen them in other books, notably the Maisie Dobbs series, and that was sort of my introduction. And since that is my favorite series ever, it's kind of hard to measure up, but very entertaining, funny, warm, light touch, no graphic violence, no bitter hatred. It's very, light and easy reading. So if anyone is in the mood for that and wants to learn a little bit more about the war, then that's a great choice. We've got Catpot in the house. Hello, my dear. Leo's laughing, probably being called out. I don't know, calling myself out. And Jim is here. Hi, Jim. shout out, preview, spoiler, I don't know. I'm going to be doing tags on Sunday, and one of them is one Jim tagged me in. So I'm finally doing a catch up. I try to do at least one per month of like a couple tags, and that will be the one. So the next book is nonfiction, and I'm sure you're all going to like sit up and take notice at this topic because it's very near and dear to your heart. Banking history. I know. I heard that crowd roar all the way from over here. It's called Bank of Scotland, 1695 to 1995, a very singular institution by Alan Cameron. And okay, you've spotted that it's about Scotland, so that's how it overlaps with my interest. It was written for the tercentenary of the bank's history. And the reason I got into looking at Bank of Scotland stuff is because money is at the root of a lot of social injustice. And so I wondered if I could put that into my current work in progress. And the 1830s are a very interesting time for banking practices in Scotland and the UK in general. We've got a little change in the empire and change in finance and change in professionalization, all these interesting things happening. So I'm going to use that. I had this book from years ago, and then when I visited Glasgow this February, I also looked at a bunch of banking books and made notes, and it's in my photos. So you'll see I have all my nice little colored tabs, and they'll make you smile. Oh, I love the colored tabs. So we've got this to draw from, and the teaser that it's going to be worked into the book. Of course, it may be like three mentions, maybe even one, who knows. But I do try to read at least one research book to like keep my mind processing and churning on the topics that I'm trying to write about. I did just start the second full draft where I'm just like redrafting entirely last Wednesday. I haven't gone back to it since last Wednesday, so it has now been a week. But I've gotten a lot of other great work done, so so that'll come into play, and that means I'm meeting some of my reading goals. Research book. What else did I have on that list? Book on my shelf. That's definitely been on my shelf a long time. Nonfiction. I got another nonfiction coming up. And, well, you'll see. Audiobook is also, and that's going to be my last book because that was my favorite this month. The third book is going to be a cookbook. Very Good Salads. Shuki Rosenboim and Louisa Allen of Very Good Falafel. So that's why they called their book Very Good Salads. I came upon this book in a clothing boutique that does mostly jewelry, but also handcrafted goods from around Portland and the state, I guess. And they had this randomly. So it's seasonal, mostly vegetarian. And it's a pair of Australian cooks who started a restaurant called Very Good Falafel because one of them grew up on a chickpea farm, falafel, and the other was Baghdadi Jewish and had lots of great recipes and experience for that heritage that uses falafel in lots of things. And so a great partnership was made. So, of course, it has what you want in a good cookbook, mouth-watering pictures. And what I particularly liked is that they have a little backstory, like a little paragraph to introduce. And it's not just like fluff and, I don't know, Rachel Ray or The View sounding introductions. It's like, this is why this was important to us. And this is when it comes in. And this is the memory it makes us think of. And I thought I really liked that personal, get to know the chefs and their recipes kind of thing. And it's not like all iceberg lettuce salads, lest you think that is the case. These are salads that often incorporate cooked vegetables in vinaigrette, for example, which is a very French thing, or we think of it as a very French thing. But, we're getting used to it as a more Mediterranean spread out and different versions. And it's also like a little fusion-y. So there's things borrowed from other cultures like Egyptian. What was the other thing that they made? Date molasses. That I need to find a source of because that sounds like amazing. I just put pomegranate molasses in my granola and yogurt this morning, and it was interesting. So I want to try the date molasses that they mentioned in this book. Very excited about that. All right, let me pause. This is our halfway point. I'm going really fast, apparently. Leo says, I'm so intrigued about how you will work the bank into your whip. Yeah. Leslie's here. Books, Girls, and Purrs, popping in to tap the like button, and I'll watch during a replay. Hellbent on finishing my current read. Nice. Leslie and I did a pop-up like reading and review session last night, which was fun. I like doing that kind of thing. Because, you know, like when you're a kid and you run over to your friend's house and knock on the door and ask if they want to play, that's kind of what I did to Leslie. I went on the Voxer and I said, are you doing a reading sprint? Do you want to come join my reading sprint? And we did. So it's fun. Not monetized. I used like Disney music on my stream. So, yes, Jim, good question. Does a salad book count as a cookbook? Because they're cooking stuff in there. Falafel, vegetables. I haven't put tabs in this one yet because I just read it for pleasure the first time. But stuffed mulberry leaves. Let me go through some of the things. Green plum, celery, and French lentils. So like different idea of salad, right? Lentil salad. Leek papillote, which is something baked in parchment paper, which not really a salad. Romanian eggplant. Eggplant salad doesn't have lettuce. Got to cook that for sure. Cucumber, dates, and pistachio. They have a lot of ingredients that I don't think I can source here, like green plums, which I'm sure you can get in Georgia because you can get in Turkey. But dates I can get. There's some other unripe thing that I was like, I'm never going to find that here. Peaches, basils, and hazelnuts, which is pretty common if you're in the natural foods circuit. Cherries, walnuts, coriander, green chili. So that is just like a feast for the eyes as well as the mouth, you know? Late December. Well, that's Australian season. So, yeah, it is a cookbook. You definitely have to cook in this. And they organize it seasonally, so I'm sure they have less cooking for the summer heat. But I'd like you to know it is summer heat on May 15th today, and I've done my best to keep the thing cool, keep the place cool. But I did turn the oven on for a rhubarb crisp this morning. Rhubarb crisp, because Dad's coming to town to renew his car registration. So I'm going to play host and have some rhubarb crisp for him. Jim says, I make salads when I don't want to cook. Fair enough. Hi, Cool Gamer. Thanks for coming in. Oh, Jim says green plums, camali, are very common in Georgian cuisine. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not that familiar. I know about them from Japanese cuisine and from Turkish, but I never got into it enough to search it out here in Portland. But I did have a couple things to say during the halfway point. I had a question of the day. I'm glad I put that in bold. I would have forgotten. Oh yeah, look at all the banners. Welcome everybody. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Here's our question of the day. Since this will be something concerning our last book, an audiobook. Question of the day is, how many places do you feel like you belong to in the world? Jim's going to have to start a list for this, I think. So let me know what you think about that. And then the other announcement for the break was, my phone is rattling here. I have a poll going. I made a little graphic for the poll. This is the graphic. We have a June book club pick that needs to happen. And someone who's already voted in the poll said, why don't you pick up the runners-up from previous polls? Because they were good ideas. They just didn't win. So that's what I did. And so it's a lot bigger than usual. Instead of 3 or 4, it's 8. And so we'll see if we get a winner. So these are the book club picks possible for June. And you can vote without being in the book club. It's just going to come down. I just want to see what popular opinion is. If you've read any of these and have them to recommend. I know Jim has read Once There Were Wolves, and we already have a vote for that one. But Dog-Eared Books on TikTok was telling me that I really need to move 13th Tale up because that is an amazing book. So I don't know. What's June going to be? What's it going to be? So if you want to help us decide, the link is in the chat. leave a comment. Tell us which book we should read. Hi, RC Scott. Nice to see you in the chat. And I'll take that down, but leave the question up. All right. I will come to the answers for the question of the day at the end when I discuss the audiobook, because you will see the point there. Okay, so last two books, second half of the wrap-up. We've got Bunyan and Henry, or The Beautiful Destiny by Mark Cecil. And you could tell there's an American folklore hero or two on the cover there, and they're named in the title, so there's no mystery. Have you heard of Paul Bunyan? Have you heard of John Henry? Let's cover that first, because in American folklore, there are these two folk heroes. I think I associate Paul Bunyan with Minnesota, and John Henry apparently with Philadelphia, maybe. And this is actually a historical fantasy, so there is magic, supernatural happenings in this. And before I say more, I will note, I know Mark Cecil. He's a friend from The Mighty Blaze, and this is his first novel. So this is a debut novel, and he went forward guns blazing. So let me consult my notes, because this is one of the ones that I have a lot of stuff to say on. Okay, so I called it historical fantasy, which I love, of course. I've written in, and I love to read it. 13th Tale being one example. It's also definitely a fable. It's definitely about a quest. And I would say it very clearly signals the stops along the hero's journey and the beats in a novel, even. So if you are a writer reading this, it's very entertaining to see oh, he just did this. Oh, he just dropped that. Oh, yep, we're at that point, because he very clearly broadcasts this is where we are in the arc and the action, which is very entertaining. He even, Mark, refers to the journey and the arc, which is meta data for the story, within the story. And it's something that the characters discuss and regard as fantasy or, a fairy tale, and mostly not going after except for the true believers. And they do follow this twisty path. So very clever. The interesting features that I liked about this book, here's the character profile. It is earnest. It is vulnerable. It is sweet. And when I was reading this, whenever I stopped and took myself out of the story and thought, okay, what vibe is this giving? I thought, man, he is laying everything out there in a really vulnerable way. So I've read historical fantasy books that are very heavy, very gothic, very twisty, with lots of layers of world building, etc. And I think that those elements help disguise the reader's investment, or the reader's stake. Sorry, not the readers, the author's stake in the story. But perhaps that's just because I don't know the authors. But I don't know Mark that well. We're in meetings, once a week for 2 years. So, I mean, I never met him in person, I should say, as well. But the earnest, sweet, vulnerable vibe is almost scary to another writer to watch, because if I thought about my books being that transparent, I would feel very open to criticism. And I think that's intentional, because the book is about a twisty path where you're going to make mistakes and you're going to fail, and you need to keep believing. You need to have faith, but it's not about religion. And so there's lots of different circles around the same truth, which is very nice, very satisfying for a reader. So very cool. I thought about comparable books as well. I looked in my Storygraph for fantasy books that I have read, and two came to mind. One is Rest in a Root by Justina Ireland, which we just read for the book club a couple months ago. And that is because it's the same clear-eyed protagonist searching for the right way through, right? So it's a person who we sympathize with, we think is good, and they're going through a very hard time to accomplish their goal. And their goal may change or may not in Rust in the Root's case, but we see them up against obstacle after obstacle and see them stay true and find their way through this like complicated dust storm. And again, it's not shadowed by big politics or very dense world building where you're going to think it's like high fantasy. It's very relatable to the modern world. It's very relatable to historical grievances. In Rust in the Root, you've got parallels between magic, good and bad, and real good and bad historical things in our world. And so I would say that's pretty similar. And there's more magic in that one. There's actually people wielding magic, whereas this is supernatural things happening that are giving clues and leading people different ways. And magical creatures, of course. So that was really good. And then the other one it called to mind was a small press book called Singing Lessons for the Stylish Canary by our lovely friend of the channel, Laura Stanfill. And that one is a very, I don't know if I'd call it slice of life, but it's a longer timeline. So these both happen, Rust in the Root is probably like a week or a month. This one is, I think about a month. And Stylish Canary is more like a generation, but it does still get at there's supernatural things happening in the world. People are trying to interpret what is right and wrong and like forge their own path and finding allies to do that. And it's just like a very simple vibe, like a very earnest, and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to lay it out. I would say Stylish Canary has a little bit more opacity in its writing than the other two, but both really fun historical fantasy reads and easy reads. Like I said, simple style, and the vibe is like pure. So I like that. It's not snarky. Sometimes I like snark, it's true, but it's not snarky. It has like no implied politics in there in terms of like conspiracy theories and stuff. It's very clear who the villain is. It's very clear, that he started here and he got here and he's oppressing people. So we got to go against him and undermine his empire. So that's one other part. And what I just said about purity. There's no like deep twisted motive that's like buried in trauma. There's definitely trauma in Bunyan and Henry, especially on the Henry side. So Paul Bunyan and John Henry, basically, there we go. We've got a white man and a black man going on an adventure, going on the hero's quest. And John Henry is able to represent a backstory in this universe where, the South is known for a certain type of oppression. And the North is less so, but still has its issues and still, I don't know, how do you prioritize or like rate oppression? But I mean politics in the sense of scheming generation after generation and putting someone on the throne. And there's a lot of high fantasy or other fantasy books that do that. And so it's not that vibe. It's like his story is start to finish in this book. And it's not like build up and string you along for 17 novels kind of story. So purity, and that sort of makes me think of it as a fable. So I really would consider this a modern fable. But yeah, so read it from my library. You could probably get it at yours, Bunyan and Henry. Congratulations, Mark. Very, very cool to have that out. Jim says, Once There Were Wolves and The 13th Tale, both amazing reads. I know, how are we going to choose? All right, we got another answer that I'll save till the end. Leo says, intrigued by these books, adding to my TBR. Yeah, some good fiction in there. And the crowning glory is the audiobook. So I've got an overlay here. So this popped up in my Libro.fm ARC possibilities. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Libro.fm. Woo! We love an indie-centered audiobook purveyor. This is called Nowhere Exactly on Identity and Belonging by M.G. Vasanji. And this will hopefully clue you in that the person has a last name that is going to fit in for the Asian readathon. But like, how does that last name arrive at where he is now? So what's very interesting is that this book is a nonfiction peregrination. I don't know, Jim, is that the right word? About belonging in the world and understanding your identity. So M.G. Vasanji is a Canadian writer and has lived in Canada for many decades now and participated in the art scene, writes fiction. And he was born in East Africa, in Kenya, grew up in Tanzania, but his family, his grandparents, emigrated to there from Gujarat in India. And so he's Indian background, living in East Africa. And then as soon as he was in college, he was in America, he went to MIT, and then did postdoc work as a scientist in Canada. So lots of different places, settled in Canada. And he's interrogating this part of himself that has been chewing on this question for decades and is able to process some of his earlier experiences differently after so long. And I loved this, like, ate it up. So you may have seen earlier on my channel, early attempts at trying to interrogate the idea of home. I had a couple of historical fiction authors on to do exactly that a couple of years ago. And I'd love to do it again because my books, my immigrant saga books, which Leslie is reading one of at the moment, they're about people being torn away from home and having no choice but to find a way somewhere else. And I have not had that happen to me, but that experience is widespread. It's very common over the world and over time. And so I feel like getting to know more about that is good in terms of political awareness, in terms of cultural sensitivity, in terms of social justice, in a lot of different ways. It's important that we understand where people are coming from and like belonging in the world. Is there anything more immediately important than a person's sense of belonging in the world? If you feel like you belong in the community where you're in and in the world, like, you don't want to kill anyone, right? So I feel like when I talk about home, I'm coming at this from a very different angle, from my personal perspective and experience. And so I really appreciated learning about this author, hearing about his experiences over 5-6 decades, and learning about, one, what it's like in Canada as opposed to America. There's a whole chapter that's like, we're not American. That is how you define Canadian literature or Canadian identity in some points. And so I thought that was pretty entertaining. But even these two things in the subtitle, identity, which is a socio-political as well as a personal question, and belonging, which has many different factors that feed into it, even on the personal level. Excuse me, I got allergies, so I'm just gonna like drip occasionally. And so I listened to this on audio, and that means that my quotes are a little paraphrased. So just to put that warning out there. Track 5, I had a note about his point that your belonging to a place cannot be defined by those who currently rule over it. And I thought, yes, I like that. So that's a very firm statement, right? That is less subjective. That is more, belonging is a subjective thing. You cannot be told you don't belong somewhere because the ruling dynasty says your kind of people do not belong there. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. And so I think about this works for me, but this also works for migrant populations, no matter what the cause, no matter where they're going, no matter where they're coming through from. And I think that's very interesting. Imagine if that was part of like international law. I mean, belonging doesn't have any legal foundation, but I love the thought exercises and just like hearing him debating himself, because he does a lot of devil's advocate stuff. And that was one of the first things where I was like, oh man, that's really interesting. Jim says nowhere exactly sounds intriguing. Yes. Oh no, it's not available on Audible UK. Maybe you'll have to switch to Libro.fm and get it as your first free book. Or maybe, well, I don't know how library apps work where you are or what you have access to. I'm sorry, Catpaw. Yeah, Canadian. And I don't know what the publishing background is there. So sorry, I can't help you immediately. So that was the first point. What was the next one? So he talks about being a writer and thinking about his audience. And one of the really cool things, being like a history nerd, that he talks about is he was thinking of his, so his grandparents who migrated to Tanzania from Gujarat are part of a certain type of population. It's the Ismaili population, I think. And it's a certain sort of stream of Islam, but sometimes it's called not Islam because it practices differently. He goes into a lot of detail about identity in India not hinging on being Hindu or Muslim, because that's a religion and he feels constrained by being either or, when his tradition of Muslim religion actually incorporated a lot of cultural Indian elements. And so he talks about medieval verses that are in a subcontinent language, not Arabic, and how those were sung, and how one of the mainstays of this religion, or their version, is the ginan, the singing of these sort of hymns, instead of the azan, which you're more familiar with from not Medina's mosque towers and such, and how that isn't considered Muslim, but it's their religious tradition and their cultural tradition. And he has sort of a bone to pick with people who want to purify Islam and say, well, that's not really Islam. This sounds familiar, right? Like, that's not really whatever. You're not good enough. You're not in the mainstream. You're not where we define you. So you're going to be in the margin. And yet another way of this happening. And so he wants to talk about his neighborhood. And so when he lived in Tanzania, it was Dar es Salaam. And he has memories of 60s and 70s, I think, in Dar es Salaam. And just this wonderful memories of a childhood there, and the Asian community there. Because if you didn't know, the reason there's an Asian community in Africa is that when it was part of the British Empire, they took people from one part of the empire and put them in another, partly to help with trade and business, partly to help with buffering between populations, and playing people off each other, probably. So anyway, that's the whole thing that's not addressed in this. But in his Asian community in Dar es Salaam, and his coming of age, he's got these great experiences of like first encountering identity and culture and belonging, which is beautiful. And all this to say, he's talking about the types of things they would do for his religion, the hymns they would sing, the rituals that he remembers from 50 years ago, the things that are sort of culturally Indian, that they kept up that are sort of vanished. Like they don't belong to any community because most people have emigrated since the African independence. And so he's like, I want to write about this. It feels important. I don't want it to be forgotten. But who would I write it for? Like, who is the audience for this? And who would find it valuable? And then you go into, should a writer think of who their audience is while they're writing and all this kind of stuff? And it was so good. So that was the point about audience, a writer's audience, which I found really compelling. He has a quote from Mary Beard, who is a Cambridge historian, and I think she's the one who wrote SPQR, like wrote a bunch of historical fiction. I think it was historical fiction. This is an area I don't know, so don't take my word for it, but I've heard her name. And the quote was, everybody has fictionalized history. And the point was, like, from the beginning, like Herodotus and Tacitus, the ancient, I don't know, are those Romans or Greeks? I don't know. They fictionalized history. So he's interrogating Western history and Western outlook and imagining what it would look like if the whole world wasn't forced to look at that as the real history or the necessary history. And instead of a center and a periphery, you had a multiplicity. And he doesn't use that word. He actually has a bone to pick with multicultural. He doesn't like that word either. But we talk about that at the very beginning. And I was like, wow, okay. But multiplicity, right? A variation in history, and realizing that it's all fictionalized to some degree, and like we can agree on certain things, and I don't know, maybe talk to each other about why we hang on to some history so much, right? Like, yeah. He even goes into language, being a writer, he goes into how language can mean a lot more to one group of people and not to another. So at the very beginning, he talks about the word partition, where to an American who's, not a history buff or an Anglophile, that could mean like a curtain. And you're like, what does that mean in history? But to people who have family in England and Ireland, no, family in India or Pakistan, it's this huge event. When India got independence from the British Empire, the people in different religious populations basically self-separated. Some did not, but many did. And there were the beginnings of and continuing communal violence episodes based on the fact that Pakistan and Bangladesh are supposed to be Muslim and India is supposed to be Hindu, but that doesn't solve all the problems. That isn't actually the case. And they're not dealing with it well even after it happens, right? So it was a very traumatic episode in the nation's apostrophe history. And an American who hasn't studied that would be like, partition, what is that? Why does that word like give you shivers? And I like that. I like the fact that if a word means something to you, it means you have a bit of that identity. You've partaken in that experience by either observing or empathizing or learning in some way. And so me, with my very little experience of actual migration or, violence and things like that, it makes me feel a little like I can belong, right? And I'm going to talk about diverse reading lists and work that into the picture as well at the end. So language, audience, fictionalized history. I think I got 3 more points. He does speak at the end a little bit about how technology and the internet have turned the world upside down a little bit, in that the people who used to be the history makers and or gatekeepers, for example, people who decided if the newspaper would review your book, right? That was what decided whether you had 5 people reading your book or 500 in a small town, for example. Because of the internet, these sorts of gatekeepers he almost argues, or at least posits the possibility, they are marginalized because they can't compete with the marketplace of ideas on the internet. And this is when I went, okay, wait a minute. I don't think he knows much about indie publishing, because on my end, I'm looking at it going, yeah, but that's where money talks. So it's not traditional gatekeepers. There's a cross-cutting influence there. You still have to have money or connections to get it in front of lots of people. So that's one of the things where I was a little reserved on his interpretation or his knowledge, because I mean, he's a writer with Doubleday. He doesn't know the indie publishing scene is my read of that. But it's a fair point. The internet has changed the power dynamics of publishing and arts in general. Then we come to my perspective and experience. All right. So I have come to this topic of home, identity, belonging, as one who has felt dislocated in an area where I should belong, right? So living in America, born in America, and yet I'm out of step with people who are my age, race, ethnicity, religion, whatever. And that is how like my sense of belonging is a little like off kilter. And I'm like, I'm finding my own friends. I'm finding my own, community to fit in with. Hello, Booktube. And so that's why I really am interested in this debate. First of all, not having participated, not having, lived extensively in another culture so that I belong to it or married into it, however you want to think of it. I'm also fascinated by immigrant journeys. It's something that's in my family history as an American, but not many of us Americans really think about that part. And so I think the Remnants saga was a great way for me to sort of go back and, I don't know, maybe I was like working the ancestral piano keys of like feeling and trying to connect with ancestors, basically trying to empathize with people who made up my family tree. And that involves trying to understand what it would be like to have the place that you've known for your whole life not be allowed. You're not allowed there anymore. Sorry, the sentence didn't work. And you've got heartbreak, you've got bewilderment, you've got what are my choices? You've got all these interesting, what do you do with your life when you have to pivot? And since I think modern society has a lot of those type of points for most people, maybe, that's why I thought it would be really relatable, hopefully, for people. But yeah. And then my perspective point I had was diverse reading lists. Yes. Okay. So I'm a big proponent of reading diversely, and what often is considered bad form in reading diversely is having a box to check. For example, you have an Asian readathon in May and you read a book and say, oh, I did it. I read an Asian book. And then you just go on your merry way, right? So you've checked the box and you don't enter into how does this different perspective interact with mine? Or what have I been doing that doesn't take into account this whole history? Or, like what my ancestors did to these people, for example. And so that's not the kind of diversification of reading lists that I'm advocating. There's ignoring diverse authors and voices. There's reading and rejecting, or not reading and rejecting diverse voices and authors. And on this continuum, there's sort of where I am in the middle, which is reading and trying to appreciate, but knowing you're not getting it. And that's like, I'm sort of stuck halfway between, and I'm okay with that for now, because that's effort at trying to, listen and hear and understand. And just realizing that I'm not over here. I'm not in the getting it category, and that's okay. I can learn and develop and sort of stew around in here, right? Because there's lots of different experiences that I want to be part of without saying, I know, right? That white lady experience of like, hosting a readathon, for example, and saying, hey, I know these Black author tubers, let's read their books. I don't know their experiences, but I want to hear them. I want to read them. I want to feature them. I want to boost their voices. And so that's me in the middle. Yeah, I said get stuck halfway between ignoring, rejecting, and like getting it. So, and that's where I still am in terms of my identity and belonging. I mean, I think very different people will have different self-identifications along that spectrum of feeling like they belong in a certain community. But in terms of the Booktube and like the reading and the publishing and the writing, I'm feeling okay with recommending books because I'm trying to have that diversity of voices and understand more diverse experiences and promote those voices. So I don't want to be a voice saying, I know. I don't want to be a voice saying like, listen to mine instead of this person's. Like, I feel like part of my duty as a white person is to offer up these, because one of my goals in life is like evening the playing field, right? So if you're interested in social justice, you're interested in letting everyone have a fair chance at health, happiness, pursuit of your joy, right? And it's just not the case for so many people. And so that's why, like, in my little way, I'm trying to encourage that, and wrestling with my own experience doing that is so interesting. But that's why it was so welcome to hear this book and have someone who has different issues with identity and belonging, but is still wrestling with it. And like, I love how we can all admit that we all have like dips, valleys, peaks in our journey to belong, and for very different reasons, of course. And like, it's sort of what we all want. We all want to belong, and there's very different ways of doing that. I think I've said very about 100 times today, so I apologize for that. Let's cut it out. Let's edit this. Yeah. So his last points were about the center and the periphery, and you know, the small town politics of Toronto. It's not a small town, but the politics of Toronto being like the mainstream, the well-funded, the gatekeepers living at the center of town as usual, and the peripheries where you get the immigrant communities and the new arrival communities. They have vibrant arts, dance, music scenes as well, but they're periphery. They're marginalized. And like, the audiences don't mix. And like, what is that about? And why is that? And would either of these populations enjoy the other's art? And can we break down the barriers? Can we even the playing field? Can we get more access? So those are the sorts of questions that I would love to have this author on the channel to talk to him. Like, that'd be so cool. But there we go. Let's go back. Jim has said, man's real home is not a house, but the road, and that life itself is a journey to be walked on foot. Bruce Chatwin. I like that. I haven't read any Bruce Chatwin. I know he did, is it like the Iron Rooster or something? No, he did the Sound Lines. I'm thinking of Thoreau. Chatwin is Sound Lines. I have that book. It's on my to-read list. I like that quote. Cat Paw has added to TBR list, not prepared to drop what they want for it. Right? Oh. Cat Paw says, too relatable. I've gone through all of those more than once. That was about 6 minutes ago. What was I saying? Can't remember exactly. Probably like the dislocation feeling of belonging. Yeah. Yay. Cat Paws. Got it. Okay. Answers to the question. Take this down. I starred my answers. We've got Jim's, I only feel I belong to two cities, London and Tbilisi, despite having lived in many places. Different people are going to have different definitions. I can meet you where you're at. I get it. I get it. I don't know if I'm going to answer this. I didn't prepare my answer. Cat Paw's answer, I did belong to London and Sandown. Now I don't belong anywhere. I'm still looking. Sandown, I don't know where that is. Huh. Nice, nice. Leo says, I belong to Portland. Also adding nowhere exactly to my TBR. It's so good, right? It only has 2 reviews on Storygraph. So I was like, oh my gosh. It's I don't think the cover is like catching many eyes. It's nice, but it looks like a textbook to me. So I want to get the word out. It's so good. And then as the Houston answer, no place. Well, you've talked about moving around a lot and liking different places. But yeah, so this is the point that it's not the same as feeling like you belong. Very true. Very true. Yeah, the cover's not catchy. It's not eye-grabbing. That's all right. I would say I definitely feel like I belong in my hometown in San Luis Obispo. Yeah, I don't think Portland's it. I don't think Portland's it. I like being here, but like the belonging, I think is mediated by the sense of having a virtual community. So interesting stuff. So yes, historical fantasy, nonfiction, research, lots of stuff going on in this May wrap up of not even like a week of books. I have, let's see. Oh yeah. So I want to remind people to vote in the poll. I got that in the chat, the link to vote in the poll for the June book club. Even if you're not going to be in the book club, you can tell us which one you think we should read. It'll give us a little bit to go on. And yeah. What are you reading? I just started The Phoenix Crown, which I'm reading with Leah Lindemann this month as a buddy read by Kate Quinn and Janie Chang. And the first chapter is so good, y'all. And of course, that's the one writers will work on the most, but like, so good. So good. Very excited about continuing. Yeah. Shannon says, interesting to think about belonging to something virtually, like we exist in the ether. Yeah. Yeah. Because like, what makes you feel a certain way? Well, how you're treated, right? So we just had a Discord server moment where Shannon was asking something and then someone replied and I was like, you guys, this is so beautiful. I love the teamwork. I was getting a little teary-eyed. It was good. The AWC is a good community. Shannon says she just finished 3 books yesterday, trying to decide what to read next. Excellent. Eloise, hello. Oh, it didn't click. No current reads for me. I'm the worst. Eloise Barr, you're not the worst. You're the greatest. Oh, I need to read Dale's Amazon ads book. A writing craft book. Okay. I bet you just finished a bunch of like romantic-y reads. So yeah, I probably want to switch up for a palate cleanser. Jim is reading Otar Chalaze for the Georgian Readathon and regretting it. It is so meandering. Oh no! Oh, I'm sorry. That's a bummer. Shannon's doing a podcast episode on it. Awesome. Oh, speaking of podcast episode, it is the 15th. So I saw Shannon just dropped a 40-minute episode on... I put it on my watch later and I forgot what it was. But it's on my list. I'll probably watch it today. Yes, I finished 3 romantic books. Awesome. Last things are, if you vote in the poll, I'm entering you in a giveaway. I'm going to give a book to a person who votes in the poll. So extra encouragement to click the link and give us a vote back up here. 12:13. That's when I put it in the chat if you want to scroll back. But yeah, so it should be easy peasy. Oh, Story Genius. That's right, Story Genius by Lisa Cron. Crone. Yeah, it looked like an intense episode, so I'm definitely gonna watch that. Cat Paw says, I finished The Wildwood yesterday and Spirit Walk earlier today, both by Charles DeLint. Oh, I was thinking of a different Wildwood, the Portland one. Charles DeLint. Historical fantasy with a bit of creepiness on the side, I would say, yeah? Interesting. I read one of his, maybe two, back in the day. Another lifetime. Oh my goodness. Well, that is me today. Thank you guys for coming and listening to me gush about a couple books and explain a couple others. I hope you enjoy the right food for your weather. Have a good sleep, Jim, and I will see you on Sunday for some tags and the drawing of a book winner. So, thanks so much. Happy reading, everybody. Bye.